Have you ever been pushed to your absolute breaking point by the person you loved most? Stripped of your dignity, mocked for your circumstances, and cast aside for someone better? Today's story is a jaw-dropping real-life drama about a devoted wife whose ruthless husband dumped her in the most humiliating way possible, laughing at her poverty in a crowded courtroom. But what he and his arrogant new fiancée didn't know was that the woman they were tearing down was hiding a secret that would absolutely obliterate their world. This is a story of ultimate betrayal, cold-blooded ambition, and the most epic, satisfying revenge you will ever hear. Grab a snack, get comfortable, and let's dive into the incredible true-to-life fiction of the Billionaire's secret heiress. The ambient lighting at Jean-Georges, overlooking the lush periphery of Central Park, was designed to make everyone look like old money. The crystal chandeliers cast a forgiving, golden glow over the titans of Wall Street and the socialites of the Upper East Side. Clara Sterling sat at a corner table, her hands folded neatly in her lap, feeling entirely out of place in her 5-year-old Zara trench coat. Across from her sat Arthur, her husband of 4 years, the man she had supported through the grueling, sleep-deprived years of his ascent at Goldman Sachs. He wore a bespoke charcoal Brioni suit that cost more than Clara's declared annual salary as a part-time archivist at the New York Public Library. On his left wrist, the Patek Philippe Nautilus she had saved up for, pretended to save up for, gleamed under the candlelight. "I asked you here because I don't want a scene at the apartment, Clara," Arthur said, his voice as smooth and emotionless as polished marble. He didn't even look at her. His eyes were fixed on the sommelier, pouring a 2015 Chateau Margaux into his glass. "A scene?" Clara's voice was quiet, a stark contrast to the thrumming anxiety in her chest. "Arthur, you haven't been home in 4 days." "And I won't be coming back," he replied smoothly, taking a sip of the wine. He finally met her gaze, and what she saw there chilled her. There was no warmth, no guilt, only a cold, calculating finality. "I'm filing for divorce. The papers will be served to you tomorrow morning. I've retained Richard Gable at Skadden to handle my side. I suggest you find someone cheap, because I'm not paying your legal fees." Clara felt the breath leave her lungs. It wasn't that they hadn't been struggling. The distance between them had grown ever since Arthur made managing director. He had become obsessed with status, with climbing the invisible ladder of Manhattan's elite. But a divorce? So abruptly, in the middle of a Michelin-starred restaurant. "Why?" she managed to whisper. Is it because of my job? Because I won't attend those horrible networking galas with the partners?" Arthur scoffed, a short, cruel sound. "It's because you lack ambition, Clara. You have no drive, no connections. Look at yourself." He gestured dismissively at her modest beige blouse and the simple silver band on her finger. "I am moving into a stratosphere where a man is judged by the woman on his arm. I need a partner who understands power. Someone who brings capital to the table, both social and literal. You bring thrift store sensibilities and a depressing acceptance of mediocrity." Before Clara could process the sheer cruelty of his words, a shadow fell over the table. "Arthur, darling, are we wrapping this up? Our reservation at the Polo Bar is in 20 minutes. Clara looked up. Standing there was Vivian Croft. She was the heiress to the Croft real estate empire, a mid-tier, overly flashy conglomerate that slapped its name on glassy, soulless condos across Miami and Manhattan. Vivian was draped in Saint Laurent, her sharp, surgically enhanced features pulled into a look of profound boredom. The scent of Baccarat Rouge 540 hit Clara in a cloying wave. "Vivian," Clara breathed, the final puzzle piece clicking into place. Vivian was the daughter of one of Goldman's biggest prospective clients. Arthur wasn't just leaving Clara, he was merging with a more profitable asset. "Hello, Clara," Vivian said, her tone dripping with patronizing pity. She didn't sit down. She simply leaned against Arthur's chair, her manicured hand with blood-red nails resting possessively on his shoulder. "I told Arthur to do this via email, but he insisted on being a gentleman. I hope you'll make this easy. Arthur is destined for great things. You were a lovely stepping stone for his 20s. But it's time for the big leagues now." Arthur smirked, kissing the back of Vivian's hand. "Vivian brings an entire network with her, Clara. Her father is backing my new private equity venture. What can you offer? A discount on late fees at the library?" Clara looked at the two of them. A normal woman would have thrown the water glass in Arthur's face. A normal woman would have screamed, caused the scene Arthur so desperately wanted to avoid, and left in tears. But Clara was not a normal woman. Beneath the Zara coat, beneath the quiet demeanor and the modest lifestyle, Clara's heart hardened. She felt a strange, terrifying calm wash over her. For 4 years, she had lived a lie for this man. She had hidden her true self to ensure he loved her for her, not for her bloodline. She had let him believe he was the provider, the protector, the ambitious one. "I see," Clara said softly, her voice steady. She reached for her purse, a plain black leather tote. "You want a woman of substance, Arthur. A woman of wealth." "I want a woman who belongs in my world," Arthur corrected coldly. "I'll give you 30 days to vacate the apartment. It's in my name, obviously." Clara stood up. She looked at Vivian's smug face, then down at Arthur, who looked merely annoyed that the conversation was taking this long. 30 days is generous," Clara said. "I'll be gone by the weekend." She didn't shed a single tear as she walked out of Jean-Georges, leaving Arthur and Vivian to their illusions of grandeur. As she stepped out into the biting Manhattan night air, Clara didn't hail a yellow cab. She walked to the edge of Columbus Circle, pulled out a heavily encrypted burner phone from the depths of her tote, and dialed a number she hadn't called in 4 years. "Thomas," she said when the line connected. "Miss Vance," a crisp British voice answered immediately, laced with profound relief. "It has been far too long. How may I assist you?" "I need a car, Thomas, and tell my grandfather. It's time." The apartment in Astoria, Queens, was everything Arthur hated. It was small, the radiator clanked like a dying engine in the winter, and the view from the window was a brick wall adorned with a faded mural. Clara had insisted on keeping this place as her sanctuary, even when Arthur moved into a sleek, soulless glass box in Tribeca. He had called it her poverty fetish. Clara sat on the edge of her lumpy mattress, staring at a framed photograph on her nightstand. It was a picture of her mother, Eleanor Vance, laughing on the shores of Lake Como. Eleanor had been the rebel of the Vance dynasty. The Vances were not merely rich, they were invisible. They were the kind of wealth that didn't appear on the Forbes list because their assets were dispersed across impenetrable trusts in Liechtenstein, sovereign land in the Pacific, and massive unlisted holding companies. Alistair Vance, Clara's grandfather, controlled Vance Global Holdings, a behemoth that owned major stakes in global shipping ports, rare earth mineral mines, and half the luxury conglomerates in Europe. Eleanor had run away from that suffocating world, seeking authenticity. She married a struggling musician, had Clara, and lived a modest life. Before Eleanor died of aggressive leukemia when Clara was 20, she had held Clara's hand in a sterile hospital room and given her one directive: "The Vance name is a curse, Clara. It attracts sharks, sycophants, and users. Hide the gold. Hide it until you find a man with a heart of flesh, not a heart of brass. Find someone who loves you when you have absolutely nothing." Clara had kept that promise. When Alistair Vance finally tracked her down after her mother's death, demanding she take her rightful place as his sole heir, Clara had struck a deal. She would accept her inheritance and the training required to run the Empire, but only after she had lived a normal life. She wanted 5 years of anonymity. She had met Arthur in her 3rd year. He was a hungry analyst, charming and seemingly devoted. Clara thought she had found her heart of flesh. But as Arthur's bank account grew, his soul shrank. The Wall Street ecosystem had poisoned him, turning him into a status-chasing predator. A heavy knock at the door pulled Clara from her memories. She opened it to find Thomas Sterling. No relation to Arthur, thankfully. Thomas was a man in his late 50s, impeccably dressed in a Savile Row suit that looked entirely alien in the dimly lit Queen's hallway. 2 massive, silent men in dark suits flanked him, their eyes scanning the perimeter. "Miss Vance," Thomas said, bowing his head slightly. "The Maybach is idling in the alley." I must say, it drew quite a few stares. "Come in, Thomas," Clara said, stepping aside. Thomas stepped into the tiny apartment, his eyes flicking over the cheap linoleum and the peeling paint. He didn't mask his distaste. "Your grandfather sends his regards. He also said, and I quote, 'I told her so.'" Clara let out a bitter laugh. "Grandfather is always right. He's going to gloat about this for a decade. He is currently in Geneva, but he is prepared to fly back immediately," Thomas said, opening a sleek leather briefcase. "I have run a preliminary background on Arthur Sterling's current maneuvers. He is, as you suspected, attempting to execute a hostile divorce. He intends to offer you a paltry lump sum and force you to sign a stringent non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement." "And the Croft girl?" Clara asked, pouring Thomas a cup of cheap drip coffee, which he accepted with heroic stoicism. "Vivian Croft. Net worth of her family is approximately 400 million, a respectable sum for the middle class," Thomas said, with zero irony. To a Vance, 400 million was a rounding error. Arthur is leveraging her family's real estate portfolio to secure a partnership at his firm. He believes marrying her will guarantee his ascension. "He told me I lacked ambition," Clara murmured, looking at her reflection in the dark window. The mousy, quiet girl in the Zara coat stared back at her. It was time for that girl to die. "What are your orders, Miss Vance?" Thomas asked quietly. "Your grandfather is ready to crush him. A single phone call and Arthur Sterling is blacklisted from every financial institution on the eastern seaboard." "No," Clara said sharply, turning around. Her eyes, usually soft and yielding, were suddenly hard, glinting with the ruthless intelligence inherited directly from Alistair Vance. "That's too easy. Arthur cares about public perception. He cares about the courtroom, the gallery, the audience. He wants to humiliate me publicly to prove to Vivian that he has entirely discarded his mediocre past. Then we shall meet him on the battlefield of his choosing," Thomas noted, a faint smile touching his lips. "Who is his lawyer?" Clara asked. "Richard Gable. Skadden, Arps, a pit bull. Very expensive, very aggressive," Clara nodded slowly. "Then I need a shark. Not a corporate fixer, Thomas. I need a litigator who can orchestrate a massacre in a courtroom and make it look like ballet." "I know just the woman," Thomas said, pulling a file from his briefcase. "Evelyn Thorne, Cravath, Swain and Moore. She normally doesn't handle divorces, but for the Vance family, she will make an exception. Shall I set up a meeting?" "Do it," Clara said. "But Thomas, Arthur can't know. Nobody can know until we are in front of the judge. I want Arthur to walk into that courtroom feeling like a king. I want him to put his entire arrogant life on the record. And then, I want to take it all." 2 weeks later, Clara sat in the hyper-modern, glass-walled conference room at the New York offices of Skadden, Arps, Slate, Meagher, and Flom. The view of One World Trade Center was designed to intimidate opposing counsel. Clara wore a simple, faded navy blue dress. It was clean, but undeniably cheap. She had tied her hair back in a messy bun, wearing no makeup. She looked exactly like the broken, defeated, soon-to-be ex-wife Arthur wanted her to be. Across the long mahogany table sat Arthur, looking like a GQ cover in a navy Tom Ford suit. Next to him was Richard Gable, a man with slicked-back silver hair, a permanent sneer, and the aggressive posture of a man who enjoyed destroying lives for an hourly rate. Next to Clara sat a junior associate from a legal aid clinic, a young, nervous man named David, whom Clara had hired specifically for this deposition to maintain her facade. Evelyn Thorne was working entirely in the shadows, orchestrating the legal trap from the plush offices of Cravath, 3 miles away. "Let's make this quick, shall we?" Richard Gable said, not even looking at Clara. He slid a thick stack of papers across the polished wood. "My client, Mr. Sterling, is being incredibly generous. Despite the fact that this is a brief, childless marriage, and despite the fact that you contributed absolutely zero financial equity to the marital assets, he is prepared to offer you a one-time lump sum of $50,000. David, the young legal aid lawyer, balked. $50,000. Mr. Sterling's bonuses alone last year were over $2 million. New York is an equitable distribution state. My client is entitled to—" "Your client," Gable interrupted smoothly, his voice dripping with condescension, "is entitled to a protracted legal battle that will drain whatever meager savings she has from her part-time library job. Mr. Sterling's wealth was generated entirely through his extraordinary efforts and unique intellect. Miss Sterling provided no support, no domestic services of value, and actively hindered his social climbing. Professional networking." Arthur leaned forward, clasping his hands. He looked at Clara with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Take the money, Clara. It's more than you've ever had in your bank account. You can move back to Ohio, or wherever it is your family is from. Start a little book club. Don't make this ugly. You can't afford ugly. The offer is contingent on signing a comprehensive NDA," Gable added, tapping the document with a solid gold Montblanc pen. "You will not speak to the press. You will not discuss the terms of this divorce, and you will not mention Vivian Croft. If you breach this, we will sue you into absolute destitution." Clara looked at the document. $50,000. It was an insult, a deliberate, calculated slap in the face, meant to remind her that she was nothing. "Arthur," Clara said, her voice trembling slightly. It wasn't fear, it was the effort of holding back laughter. "We were married for 4 years. I proofread your pitch decks at 3 a.m. I ironed your shirts when you were a junior analyst because we couldn't afford dry cleaning. Is this really all I amount to?" Arthur sighed, looking bored. "You're romanticizing the past, Clara. You were a warm body in a cold apartment. I've outgrown you. Vivian and I are closing on a $10 million penthouse next week. I cannot have you lingering around, demanding alms like a beggar." "Sign the paper." Clara looked down at the paper. She picked up the cheap plastic pen David had provided. She let the silence stretch, watching Arthur's smug satisfaction grow. He thought he had won. He thought he had crushed her spirit entirely. Instead of signing, Clara slowly capped the pen and pushed the document back across the table. "No," she said softly. Gable's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" "I said no," Clara repeated, her voice steadying, the tremble vanishing entirely. "I am not taking your $50,000, and I am certainly not signing a non-disclosure agreement." Arthur slammed his hand on the table, his composure cracking for a fraction of a second. "Don't be a fool, Clara. You have no money for a trial. You have no representation. This boy next to you is shaking in his cheap suit. We will see you in court, Arthur, Clara said, standing up. She smoothed down her faded navy dress. I want a public hearing. Open records. Let a judge decide what your extraordinary efforts are really worth. You are going to regret this, Gable sneered, packing up his briefcase. When we are done with you in front of Judge Harper, you will owe us money. We'll see, Clara said simply. As she walked out of the conference room, her burner phone vibrated in her pocket. It was a text from Evelyn Thorne. The trap is set. We have Arthur's offshore accounts, and we have the Vance Global dependency data. Enjoy your weekend, Miss Vance. On Monday, we burn his kingdom to the ground. Clara stepped into the elevator, the doors closing on Arthur's furious, arrogant face. As the car descended, Clara smiled. The mouse was dead. The heiress had awakened. The Vance family's private penthouse at the Carlisle Hotel was a masterclass in quiet, terrifying wealth. Unlike the ostentatious, gold-plated aesthetics favored by the new money crowd, like the Croft family, the Vance residence was steeped in legacy. Original Rothko and Cy Twombly canvases hung on walls of hand-upholstered raw silk. The panoramic view of Central Park was breathtaking, but inside the room, the atmosphere was strictly business. Clara stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the crawling yellow taxis on Madison Avenue. She was no longer wearing the faded Zara coat. At Thomas's insistence, the Astoria wardrobe, as he disdainfully called it, had been incinerated. Today, Clara wore a tailored, charcoal-grey Loro Piana cashmere sweater and wide-leg wool trousers. Around her neck hung a simple, flawless teardrop diamond pendant, a family heirloom that Alistair Vance had couriered over from a private vault in Geneva overnight. You look like a completely different person, Miss Vance. A sharp, authoritative voice echoed from the dining room. Clara turned. Sitting at a massive mahogany table strewn with financial dossiers was Evelyn Thorne. Evelyn was a legend in New York legal circles. As a senior partner at Cravath, Swain and Moore, she was the lawyer billionaires called when they needed to quietly destroy a rival or extract themselves from catastrophic scandals. She wore a pristine white Tom Ford suit, her silver hair cut into a severe, elegant bob. I feel like a different person, Evelyn, Clara replied, walking over to the table and taking a seat across from the legal shark. For 4 years I made myself small. I dimmed my own light so Arthur could shine. I convinced myself it was out of love, but looking back, I was just hiding. Evelyn offered a thin, predatory smile. She picked up her espresso cup, taking a slow sip. Love makes fools of us all, my dear. But the beauty of the law is that it provides a mathematical equation to balance the emotional deficit. And your soon-to-be ex-husband's math is incredibly sloppy. Evelyn slid a thick, leather-bound dossier across the table. Clara opened it. Inside were pages of bank statements, shell company registrations, and wire transfer logs. Arthur Sterling believes he is a financial genius, Evelyn began, her tone laced with professional disdain. He has spent the last 2 years siphoning marital assets, his massive Goldman Sachs bonuses, into an offshore trust in the Cayman Islands, managed by a boutique firm called Vanguard Aegis. He did this to ensure that, upon divorcing you, his net worth would appear significantly lower to the New York courts. He planned to leave you with pennies while he sat on millions. Clara traced her finger over the numbers. $8.5 million. Money he had claimed was lost in bad market bets when she had asked about upgrading their heating system in Queens. A cold fury settled into her bones. He really thought I was an idiot. He thought you were poor, Evelyn corrected. And in his worldview, poverty equates to a lack of intelligence. but his arrogance is his undoing. You see Vanguard, Aegis, the firm managing his hidden assets? Clara looked up, catching the dangerous glint in Evelyn's eye. Let me guess. Grandfather owns it. Vance Global Holdings acquired their parent company 16 months ago, Evelyn confirmed, leaning back in her chair. Which means Arthur unknowingly entrusted his stolen millions to your family. Furthermore, let's discuss his new fiancée, Vivian Croft. Evelyn tapped a glossy brochure for a new luxury condominium development in Hudson Yards, spearheaded by Croft Real Estate. Arthur is leveraging his marriage to Vivian to launch his own private equity fund. Croft Real Estate is his anchor investor. However, Croft Real Estate is heavily over-leveraged. They took out a $600 million mezzanine loan last quarter to keep their Miami projects afloat. If that loan is called in early, the Croft empire collapses into bankruptcy within 48 hours. Who holds the debt? Clara asked, though the answer was already forming in her mind. A shadow equity firm called Meridian Capital, Evelyn smiled. A wholly owned subsidiary of Vance Global. You, Clara, effectively own Vivian Croft's entire inheritance. Clara sat back, the sheer magnitude of the web Alistair Vance had spun coming into focus. Her grandfather hadn't just watched her from afar, he had built an invisible fortress around her, waiting for the day she would need it. Arthur wants a public spectacle, Clara said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. He wants to humiliate me on the record to prove to Vivian and his Wall Street friends that he has severed his ties with the mediocre working class. Then we will give him a spectacle, Evelyn said, snapping the dossier shut. We let Richard Gable dig the grave. We let Arthur testify under oath about his finances and his brilliant new alliances. And then we drop the guillotine. Thomas appeared silently in the doorway, holding a garment bag from Dior. Your armor for tomorrow, Miss Vance. Shall I arrange the Maybach for the courthouse? No, Clara said, her eyes narrowing. Arthur expects a defeated librarian. I'll take a regular black cab. I want him to feel superior right up until the very last second. Monday morning in Lower Manhattan was brisk and grey. Outside the New York County Supreme Court at 60 Center Street, a minor media circus had assembled. Vivian Croft, ever desperate for attention, had leaked the high-profile divorce of a rising Wall Street star to Page 6. When Arthur and Vivian arrived in a chauffeur-driven Rolls-Royce Cullinan, the flashbulbs erupted. Vivian stepped out wearing a blindingly pink Chanel tweed skirt suit, clutching a crocodile Hermes Birkin bag like a shield. She smiled for the cameras, clinging to Arthur's arm. Arthur looked incredibly pleased with himself, wearing a bespoke, double-breasted suit, projecting the image of a master of the universe shedding his starter wife. Clara arrived 10 minutes later, in a scuffed yellow cab. She stepped out unnoticed by the paparazzi, who were busy asking Vivian about her upcoming engagement party in the Hamptons. Clara wore a sharply tailored, midnight blue Alexander McQueen suit. It was understated but impeccably cut, paired with simple black pumps. She kept her head down, bypassing the press, and walked through the heavy revolving doors. Inside courtroom 314, the air was tense. Arthur had populated the gallery with several of his junior analysts and frat brothers, a cruel audience brought in specifically to witness Clara's public humiliation. Clara took her seat at the respondents' table. Next to her sat David, the young legal aid attorney, who was sweating profusely and organizing his legal pads. Across the aisle, Arthur and Richard Gable were laughing quietly, looking over at Clara with thinly veiled contempt. Vivian sat directly behind Arthur in the gallery, filing her nails. All rise, the bailiff barked, the Honourable Judge Eleanor Harper presiding. Judge Harper, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s known for her brutal efficiency, took the bench. She adjusted her glasses and peered down at the docket. Sterling versus Sterling. I see we have a motion for a summary judgment and asset distribution. Mr. Gable, you represent the petitioner? I do, Your Honor, Gable said, standing up and smoothing his silk tie. And we are hoping for a very swift resolution today. My client, Arthur Sterling, is a man of extraordinary talent and means. He is seeking a clean dissolution of a marriage that, frankly, was over before it began. Get to the financials, Counselor, Judge Harper said dryly. Of course, Gable purred, pacing in front of the bench. This is a brief, childless union of 4 years. During this time, Mr. Sterling generated 100% of the marital wealth. He worked 80-hour weeks as a managing director at Goldman Sachs. Meanwhile, the respondent, Clara Sterling, worked 12 hours a week at a public library. She contributed no capital, no vital domestic support, and possesses no assets of her own. Gable turned to look directly at Clara, his voice rising theatrically for the benefit of the gallery. We offered the respondent a very generous settlement of $50,000 to walk away quietly. She refused. We believe this is a blatant attempt at extortion. She is a woman attempting to latch onto a rocket ship she did not build, demanding a payday she did not earn. We ask the court to enforce our proposed settlement and dismiss her claims entirely. A low murmur of amusement rippled through Arthur's friends in the gallery. Arthur turned slightly, offering Vivian a confident wink. Judge Harper frowned, looking at the documents Gable handed the clerk. Mr. Gable, New York is an equitable distribution state. Regardless of her income, a spouse is generally entitled to a fair share of assets accrued during the marriage. Assets, Your Honor? Gable feigned shock. My client's liquid assets have been severely depleted due to market volatility. His net worth is currently evaluated at just under $200,000. The $50,000 we offered represents a full 25% of his wealth. It is beyond fair. It is charity. Clara sat perfectly still. 200,000. He was lying under oath in front of a Supreme Court judge. He had completely committed to the fraud. I see, Judge Harper said, looking over her glasses at the respondent's table. Mr. David. Miller, is it? You represent the respondent. Do you have a rebuttal to these claims? Or does your client wish to reconsider the settlement offer? David swallowed hard. He stood up, his knees visibly shaking, but there was a faint, knowing smirk playing on his lips. Your Honor, David stammered slightly. I do not have a rebuttal. Arthur let out a loud, scoffing laugh. Gable smirked, beginning to pack his briefcase. The trial was over in their minds. However, David continued, finding his voice, I am stepping down as primary counsel at this time. I am yielding the floor to lead counsel for the respondent. Gable froze. Arthur's laugh died in his throat. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a dramatic, echoing thud. The rhythmic click-clack of expensive heels on the marble floor silenced the courtroom instantly. Every head turned. Evelyn Thorne walked down the center aisle, exuding an aura of absolute terrifying power. She held a sleek black leather briefcase, her posture impeccably straight, her eyes fixed entirely on Richard Gable. Behind her walked Thomas, carrying 2 massive banker's boxes. Gable's mouth fell open. He knew exactly who she was. Every lawyer in Manhattan knew who she was. Good morning, Your Honor, Evelyn said, her voice rich, resonant, and dripping with authority. She bypassed the swinging gate and took her place next to Clara, resting her hands on the table. Evelyn Thorne, of Cravath, Swain and Moore, acting as lead counsel for the respondent. Judge Harper's eyebrows shot up to her hairline. Ms. Thorne, I didn't realize Cravath was taking on pro bono family law cases for librarians. Oh, my client is paying my full hourly rate, Your Honor, Evelyn replied with a chilling smile. And we are not here to accept a settlement. We are here to expose a massive, coordinated financial fraud perpetrated by the petitioner. Arthur leaned over to Gable, his face pale, "Who is that? Why is she here?" he hissed. "Shut up," Gable hissed back, his usual arrogance entirely evaporated. Sweat was beading on his forehead. "That's Evelyn Thorne. She doesn't get out of bed for less than $100 million. Something is very wrong." "Objection, Your Honor," Gable shouted, finding his footing. "This is an ambush. Opposing counsel was not disclosed on the docket." "I filed my notice of appearance electronically at 8:59 a.m. this morning, Mr. Gable," Evelyn cut in smoothly. "Perfectly within the procedural rules, unless you need a recess to change your trousers." A few gasps echoed from the gallery. Judge Harper suppressed a smile. Overruled. "Proceed, Miss Thorne." "Thank you, Your Honor," Evelyn said. She motioned for Thomas, who placed the heavy banker's boxes on the table. "Mr. Gable just testified that his client's net worth is $200,000 due to market volatility. That is perjury. For the past 24 months, Mr. Sterling has systematically funneled marital assets totaling $8.5 million into an offshore trust known as Vanguard Aegis in the Cayman Islands." Evelyn pulled a stack of heavily stamped documents and handed them to the bailiff to pass to the judge. "These are wire transfer logs, signed by Arthur Sterling, originating from his personal Goldman Sachs accounts, routed through a shell company called Blue Horizon Holdings, directly into Vanguard Aegis." Arthur gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. His eyes darted frantically around the room. "That's illegal! You can't access offshore accounts without a federal warrant. They're protected." "They are protected," Evelyn agreed, turning her piercing gaze on Arthur. "Unless the parent company of the offshore bank willingly provides the records to their employer. Vanguard Aegis is a wholly owned subsidiary of Vance Global Holdings." "What does Vance Global have to do with this?" Gable demanded, panicking. "This is a divorce case." "It has everything to do with this," Evelyn said, her voice echoing in the dead silent room. "Because my client, whom Mr. Sterling so eloquently described as a parasite and a warm body, is not just a librarian." Evelyn turned to Clara. Clara slowly stood up. The mousy, defeated girl from Astoria was entirely gone. In her place stood a woman radiating cold, undeniable power. She looked at Arthur, and for the first time in their relationship, Arthur felt entirely small. "Allow me to formally introduce my client to the court," Evelyn said, her voice ringing out like a judge pronouncing a sentence. "Clara Eleanor Vance, sole heir to Alistair Vance, and as of 8 a.m. this morning, the newly appointed majority shareholder and chairwoman of the board of Vance Global Holdings." The silence in the courtroom was so profound, it felt like a vacuum. Vivian Croft, sitting in the gallery, let out a loud, undignified squeak. Arthur stared at Clara, his jaw hanging slack, his brain entirely unable to process the words. Clara Vance? The Vance family? They owned half the world. That's impossible," Arthur whispered, the reality of his situation crashing down on him like a physical weight. "Clara, you're broke. You clip coupons." "I was protecting my family's legacy from gold diggers, Arthur," Clara said, her voice crystal clear, carrying effortlessly across the room. "And it appears my instincts were entirely correct." "But wait, there is more, Your Honor," Evelyn continued mercilessly, pulling another document from the box. "Mr. Sterling claimed he needs this divorce to pursue a new private equity venture, backed by Croft Real Estate." Evelyn gestured toward Vivian, who shrank back in her seat. "What Mr. Sterling does not know is that Croft Real Estate is currently operating on a $600 million mezzanine loan provided by Meridian Capital. Meridian Capital is another Vance Global subsidiary. Miss Vance literally owns the debt on the Croft family empire." Evelyn walked slowly toward Arthur's table, leaning down to look him directly in the eyes. "You didn't outgrow my client, Mr. Sterling. You were a temporary guest in her kingdom. And as of today, your lease is terminated. The silence that followed Evelyn Thorne's devastating revelation in courtroom 314 was heavy enough to crush bone. For a full 60 seconds, nobody moved. The only sound was the faint, rhythmic ticking of the antique mahogany clock on Judge Harper's wall, counting down the final seconds of Arthur Sterling's meticulously constructed life. Arthur's face had drained of all color, taking on the waxy, translucent pallor of a corpse. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish pulled from the Hudson River. He looked from Evelyn to Clara, his eyes begging for a punchline that was never going to come. "You're lying," Arthur finally choked out, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched rasp. He pointed a trembling finger at Clara. "She buys her shoes at discount racks. She clips coupons for groceries. This is a trick. Gable, do something." Richard Gable did not do something. The aggressively confident Scadden partner was currently shrinking into his chair, rapidly calculating the catastrophic damage to his own career. Submitting falsified financial documents to a Supreme Court judge was grounds for disbarment. "Your Honor," Gable said, his voice trembling slightly. He stood up, putting a noticeable physical distance between himself and Arthur. I would like to formally request a recess, and I must inform the court that I am immediately withdrawing as Mr. Sterling's counsel, citing a fundamental breakdown of attorney-client trust. I had absolutely no knowledge of these offshore accounts." "You coward," Arthur hissed, grabbing Gable's sleeve. "You told me the Vanguard Trust was bulletproof." Gable violently yanked his arm away. "Don't touch me, Arthur. You lied to me. You perjured yourself." "Order," Judge Harper barked, slamming her gavel so hard the sound echoed like a gunshot. She glared down at Arthur with a look of absolute, unadulterated disgust. "Mr. Sterling, you have not only attempted to defraud your wife, but you have also attempted to make a mockery of this court. I am immediately freezing all of your domestic accounts. I am holding you in contempt of court for perjury. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal fraud investigation." Arthur slumped into his chair, burying his face in his hands. The junior analysts from his firm, who had been laughing mere minutes ago, were already slipping out the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom, desperate to distance themselves from a radioactive man. But the carnage was not over. Vivian Croft, who had been sitting paralyzed in the gallery, suddenly stood up. Her pink Chanel suit, which had looked so triumphant an hour ago, now just looked garish. Her surgically sculpted face was contorted into a mask of pure terror. She bypassed the wooden gate and practically sprinted toward Clara's table. "Clara, Miss Vance," Vivian stammered, her voice stripped of its usual patronizing drawl. "Please, you have to understand. Arthur lied to me too. I didn't know he was hiding money. And about Meridian Capital, about the loan." Vivian's eyes welled with tears, genuine ones this time. The realization had hit her with the force of a freight train. Clara wasn't just richer than her. Clara held the literal deed to the Croft family's survival. If Clara called in the mezzanine loan, the Crofts wouldn't just lose their luxury condos. They would lose their homes, their cars, their entire social standing. They would be exiled from Manhattan high society forever. "Vivian," Arthur pleaded, reaching out toward her from his table. "Vivian, baby, don't listen to them. We can fix this. My private equity fund." "Are you insane?" Vivian shrieked, turning on him with a ferocity that startled the bailiff. "You don't have a private equity fund. You have a criminal record pending. You told me she was a nobody. You told me she was trash. You arrogant, stupid man. You just bankrupted my entire family." She turned back to Clara, her hands clasped together in a desperate, pleading gesture. "Miss Vance, my father had a heart attack last year. If Croft Real Estate goes under, it will kill him. Please, I'll do anything. I'll leave Arthur right now. I'll never speak to him again." Clara looked at Vivian. She felt a brief, fleeting flicker of pity for the woman, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of Vivian's cruel laughter at Jean-Georges. "Ms. Croft," Clara said, her voice perfectly even, betraying no emotion. "My grandfather always taught me that business is merely a reflection of character. Your family built an empire on predatory lending and cheap materials, masking it all in flash and mirrors, just like your fiancé." Clara picked up her black leather briefcase. "I will not call in the loan early. I am not a monster." Vivian let out a loud, gasping sob of relief. "Oh, thank God, thank you." "However," Clara interrupted smoothly, "Meridian Capital will be restructuring the terms of the debt. The interest rate will be raised to the maximum legal limit, and we will require 2 seats on the Croft Real Estate Board of Directors to ensure our investment is not squandered on your engagement parties. If you default on a single payment, we liquidate everything." Vivian's relief vanished, replaced by a grim realization of her new reality. She was now a serf in Clara Vance's kingdom. She nodded slowly, completely defeated, and walked out of the courtroom without a single backward glance at Arthur. Arthur sat alone at his table. He looked up at Clara, his eyes red and rimmed with tears. The arrogance was completely gone, hollowed out, and replaced by a terrifying, endless void. "Clara," he whispered, 4 years. We were married for 4 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you? I loved you." Clara paused. She looked at the man she had once made him coffee for, the man whose neckties she had straightened, whose ego she had endlessly stroked. "You didn't love me, Arthur," she said softly, but firmly. "You loved the mirror I held up to you. And when I wasn't shiny enough anymore, you tried to smash it. Now you have to look at yourself without any filters. And I imagine you're going to hate what you see." With that, Clara turned and walked up the aisle. Evelyn Thorne and Thomas flanked her like a royal guard. As she pushed through the heavy wooden doors and stepped out into the chaotic, flashing lights of the New York press, Clara Vance didn't flinch. She raised her head, ready to conquer the world. The transition from a cramped apartment in Queens to the apex of global finance was not merely geographical. It was an entire psychological metamorphosis. For 6 months, Clara lived out of a suite at the Mandarin Oriental, while a team of architects retrofitted her mother's old, sprawling townhouse on the Upper East Side. But Clara spent little time thinking about real estate. Her battlefield was the boardroom. Vance Global Holdings was headquartered in a monolithic, obsidian glass skyscraper in the financial district. The executive floor was a silent, intimidating expanse of white marble and brushed steel. When Clara first stepped off the private elevator as the newly minted chairwoman, the board of directors, 14 men in their 60s and 70s, all of whom had been terrifying titans of industry for decades, viewed her with deep, barely concealed skepticism. They saw a librarian. They saw a young woman who had hidden from her legacy. But Alistair Vance, her grandfather, sat at the end of the massive glass table, a proud, dangerous smirk on his weathered face. He had trained her in secret for a reason. "Gentlemen," Clara began her first board meeting, taking the seat at the head of the table. She didn't raise her voice, but the acoustic design of the room carried her calm authority perfectly. "I have spent the last few weeks reviewing our holdings, and I have found several inefficiencies. Over the next 4 hours, Clara dismantled them. She possessed an eidetic memory and a terrifying capacity for data analysis, skills she had honed archiving complex historical texts, now applied to corporate structures. "We are divesting entirely from the lithium mines in the Democratic Republic of Congo," Clara announced, projecting a dizzying array of supply chain charts onto the screen. "Ms. Vance, with all due respect," protested Richard Sterling, a cousin of Arthur's though they rarely spoke, and a man who currently looked terrified for his job. Those mines represent a 12% yield on our African portfolio. Divesting will cost us hundreds of millions in projected revenue. The human cost is unacceptable, Clara countered immediately, her gaze pinning him to his chair. The labor practices are abhorrent and violate international law. We are a holdings company, not a cartel. Furthermore, the PR liability alone outweighs the yield. I have already initiated the sale to a sovereign wealth fund. The capital will be immediately redirected. Redirected where? Another board member asked nervously. Green energy infrastructure in Scandinavia and a massive expansion of the Vance Philanthropic Foundation, Clara said. This was her true ambition. She didn't just want to hoard wealth, she wanted to weaponize it for good. It was the only way she could reconcile the staggering power of her inheritance with the compassionate soul her mother had cultivated within her. It was through the foundation that she met Elias Grant. Elias was the global director of the Vance Foundation. Unlike the slick-suited men of Wall Street, Elias was a former human rights lawyer who preferred rumpled corduroy jackets and had a habit of losing his reading glasses in his own hair. He was brilliant, fiercely ethical, and utterly unimpressed by wealth for wealth's sake. Their first meeting took place in the Foundation's lower-level offices, which were chaotic and overflowing with grant proposals and blueprints for clean water initiatives. "Miss Vance," Elias said, looking up from a desk buried in paperwork as she entered. He didn't bow or scramble to attention. He just offered a warm, slightly exhausted smile. "I was told the new chairwoman wanted to gut my department. Should I pack up my desk?" Clara smiled, genuinely amused for the first time in weeks. "Actually, Mr. Grant, I'm here to triple your budget. I want to launch the affordable housing initiative in Detroit you pitched to my grandfather 3 years ago, the one he rejected for being too sentimental." Elias paused, his intelligent brown eyes studying her closely. "Triple the budget? That's nearly $2 billion, Ms. Vance. The board will have a stroke." "Let them," Clara said, leaning against his desk. "I own 60% of the voting shares. My grandfather gave me the keys to the kingdom. I intend to remodel." Over the next year, Elias and Clara worked tirelessly together. They traveled to sites in Detroit, they lobbied in Washington, and they spent late nights in the office eating cheap Chinese takeout, a small, comforting reminder of Clara's old life. With Elias, Clara didn't have to hide. She didn't have to pretend to be less intelligent, less driven, or less capable. Elias challenged her, argued with her passionately over resource allocation, and most importantly, respected her deeply. He didn't see the Vance fortune. He saw Clara. He was the man with the heart of flesh her mother had told her to wait for. Slowly, the icy armor Clara had built to survive Arthur and the divorce began to thaw. She learned how to laugh again. Not the polite, restrained chuckle of a corporate wife, but a full, resonant laugh that echoed through the marble halls of her grandfather's empire. She was stepping into her authentic self, a woman of immense power, but also of profound empathy. 2 years after the divorce, New York was experiencing a rare, golden autumn. The Metropolitan Museum of Art was hosting its annual gala, and Clara Vance was the guest of honor, having just endowed a massive new wing dedicated to preserving indigenous histories. She stood on the sweeping steps of the Met, wearing a custom emerald green Valentino gown that caught the flash of 100 cameras. She looked radiant, powerful, and entirely at peace. Next to her stood Elias Grant, looking surprisingly dashing in a classic tuxedo, holding her hand with a quiet, grounding strength. "You survived the press line," Elias whispered, kissing her temple. "I'm proud of you. I know how much you hate the cameras." "I don't hate them anymore," Clara smiled. "I just prefer looking at you." As they moved toward the entrance, A voice called out from the shadows near the service elevators. Clara. Clara stopped. The voice was older, rougher, lacking the smooth, arrogant cadence it once possessed, but she recognized it instantly. She turned. Standing behind a velvet rope, holding a clipboard and wearing a cheap, ill-fitting black suit with a security badge pinned to the lapel, was Arthur Sterling. The mighty had not just fallen, they had plummeted into the earth. Following the perjury scandal, Arthur had been blacklisted by every financial institution on the globe. The SEC had fined him into oblivion, stripping him of the hidden millions in the Cayman accounts, which were seized and tied up in federal litigation. Vivian had publicly dumped him, and without her family's backing, his private equity dream died before it began. With no transferable skills other than schmoozing and manipulating spreadsheets, he had been reduced to working for a high-end event security firm. He looked 10 years older. The bespoke suits were gone, replaced by tired eyes and a posture of permanent defeat. Clara stepped toward the velvet rope. Elias stayed a few paces back, giving her space, but keeping a protective eye on the man who had caused her so much pain. "Arthur," Clara said, her voice entirely neutral. No anger, no malice. Just the calm acknowledgement of a stranger. "I saw your name on the guest list," Arthur said, his voice trembling slightly. He looked down at her emerald gown, then up at her face, realizing she was more beautiful and untouchable than she had ever been. I just wanted to say congratulations on the endowment." "Thank you," Clara said simply. Arthur gripped the clipboard, his knuckles white. The desperation rolled off him in waves. "Clara, please, I'm drowning. Nobody will hire me. I live in a studio in Jersey City. I can't even afford to pay off the legal fees from the divorce. You have so much now. If you could just make one phone call, tell the banks you forgive me. Tell them I'm rehabilitated. I'll work in the mailroom. Anything." Clara looked at the man she had once vowed to spend her life with. She remembered the nights she had stayed up worrying about his stress levels. She remembered the way he had laughed at her in Jean-Georges, calling her a parasite. If this had happened a year ago, she might have felt a spark of vindictive joy. But looking at him now, she felt absolutely nothing. Arthur wasn't a monster anymore. He was just a sad, empty vessel of a man who had worshipped money and status and had been destroyed by his own false gods. "I don't hold any anger toward you, Arthur," Clara said gently. "But I don't hold any mercy for you either. You built your life on the suffering and exploitation of others. You are exactly where your choices led you." "Clara, please—" "Goodbye, Arthur," Clara said, her tone final. She turned away from him and walked back to Elias. Elias offered his arm and she took it, feeling the solid, honest warmth of him. "Are you okay?" Elias asked softly as they walked through the grand glass doors of the museum. "I am," Clara said, taking a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. "For the first time in my life, I am exactly where I am supposed to be." She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Clara Vance had finally stopped hiding in the shadows of other people's ambitions. She had embraced her own light, her own power, and her own profound worth. The mousy librarian from Astoria was gone, but the heart of flesh remained, beating strong and steady at the top of the world. Wow, what an absolutely incredible journey. Clara's story is a powerful reminder that true wealth isn't measured by the designer clothes on your back or the zeros in your bank account. It's measured by your character, your resilience, and your ability to stay authentic in a world obsessed with status. She turned the ultimate betrayal into the ultimate triumph, proving that those who underestimate a quiet, humble heart do so at their own peril. If Clara's epic comeback and her journey to finding real, genuine love with Elias inspired you, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that karma never misses an address, and subscribe to our channel for more jaw-dropping, emotional, and satisfying revenge stories. Leave a comment down below. What would you have done in Clara's shoes? See you in the next video.